Hello, it's Peter Merrick. I'm so excited. I'm speaking to a colleague and really good friend of mine, Kingsley Cato. He's a Canadian. He's chosen to live in Panama City. He made this move in the last 2 years. Now, Kingsley is a serial entrepreneur. He has been doing this, finding opportunity, turning them into companies that earn actual income for over 25 years. He is the CEO president of Purple Trinity Group. And this is an investment company that finds those opportunities and brings them back both to Americans and Canadians, where the price to earning ratio is much lower. Therefore, the profitability is much higher. What we are going to be discussing during the next 20, 30, even an hour, because we're going to talk as long as it takes to look at the opportunity and to understand what Kingsley is seeing. And before I introduce Kingsley, where you're going to hear his story, I think it's really important to understand that you need people on the ground. I was in the financial service industry for 30 years, and many stockbrokers never stepped into the companies that they were advising their clients to invest in. They never saw it. Now, many people in the investment field say that they're like Warren Buffett. They're not, because Warren Buffett, he buys real companies. He will buy them directly. If he can't buy them directly, he'll buy them on the market, because he understands those businesses. And those are the people that you need, especially in this time of transition. And we're also going to be talking about some of the opportunities that Kingsley has found, that he's working on, that investors are planting their feet in Panama, outside of Canada, and through Central and South America. Kingsley, thank you so much for joining me today from Panama City. And I love the mountain behind you. I can see trees in the background.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, Peter. And yes, it's a beautiful day in Panama. It's always sunny. This is supposedly rainy season, but it only rains on and off, and it's mostly sunny days.
Beautiful. So share with me your story, your entrepreneur story, because I think to give everyone listening a little background on yourself.
Well, I grew up in a family that was very, entrepreneurial. Generally, we saw family members involved in politics or business. So we hail from the Southern Caribbean. My father's family is Vincentian. My mother's family is Grenadian. I grew up in Toronto, and I remember, as a child being taken to the Caribbean, going to my grandfather's sugar factory or going to my other grandfather's furniture business. And so I was always surrounded by businessmen and politicians. We've had two family members who were prime ministers in the Caribbean, and one who was deputy prime minister. We've had a president of the Senate in the family. So I just sort of grew up in that environment where we were, taught to be self-sufficient and to go out and find opportunity to, make our lives better.
Well, I just want to focus on your Canadian experience, because you spent a good portion, most of your life in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, for our American friends and international friends who are listening. So Toronto is about 3 million people, and the Greater Toronto Area, which surrounds it, is getting close to 8 million. It's the third largest metropolitan area in Canada, the US, after New York, Los Angeles, then it's Toronto, followed by Chicago. Kingsley, share with me your experiences in Toronto and your business experiences, and then how you branched out internationally.
Well, the wonderful thing about growing up in Toronto is if you grew up in certain areas, you sort of grew up with the entire world. And what I mean by that is in my classes as you know, early as let's say grade 7, I would look around in my classroom and I would see folks who had backgrounds from Italy, from Greece, from the UK. Um, we even had one person from India, one from China. And in those days, there weren't a lot of folks from Asia, but this was the environment. So friends I grew up with were, you know, Jewish and Indian and Greek and Italians and so on. So immediately you realize that there is more to, you know, there's more to the globe, right? And so through those friends, you would have access to different cultures and cultural experiences, and different countries, because many of the places I've been, and I can say I've been around the world a few times, it is because initially I was invited there by friends, and in some cases family. So doing business in Toronto, you sort of, you know, naturally do business with just about everyone. It was a matter of whether or not they were competent and capable, and whether or not there was an opportunity. And so pretty much that was my experience in Toronto. And Toronto, like I like to say, is a gateway to the rest of the globe because of the multiculturalism. And so growing up in that environment, just, you know, it was just a natural progression for me to branch out into different parts.
I found that as well. Being in Toronto, is the UN has classified it as the most diverse multicultural city in the world, and proved to me how diverse it is and how it is a gateway to the world. Is a good friend of mine who's now living in Phoenix that I will be speaking with. After his business blew up, he got involved in a company that was a network marketing company. And he's got over 140,000 people. Yes, 140,000 people in his network. And he shared with me the way his network grew like that is because he recruited people in Canada. And as soon as those markets opened up in other countries, he immediately had people, you know, in his network. And no one in the States could compete with them because when they opened up those markets, they were going there fresh. But he had people who had really key people in those countries. And we're talking, he's got a private jet now. So, and it all came because he had that international business, and he deals a lot with international business. And I credit that to Toronto for two reasons. One, Canada, up until the changes that have happened, was a kind and gentle country. Multiculturalism was our plus. It didn't matter where you came from, you were respected. And you also integrated into a country of laws that took care of its people. So there was a level of social capital that you can't put a price on, that if someone got sick, they weren't going to lose their house. We didn't have the super wealthy like they do in certain countries, but we didn't have the people on the streets. And that made us as Canadians feel proud. And that was important. So that was one of the benefits of living in Toronto, having that network and being in the most diverse city, because that allows us to talk to other people. So I just want to focus on your experiences and your starting businesses that you were involved in. You had some really interesting ones. You were very active in Black History Month as well in Toronto.
Well, I wanted to be an entrepreneur from the age of 14. Like I said, it's what I saw in the family. And I mean, I at 14, I started by buying and selling video games, right? Um, I would get on TTC and find my way downtown to different video game shops where I could buy the used games and, you know, find my way back to my neighborhood and sell them to to friends. and make small profits. So I would like to think that's where my entrepreneurial career began. By the age of 16, I was selling, small bottles of perfumes. I remember having to go to the bank with my mother so she can open a bank account for me because I was underage, and I also had a lot of support, obviously, from my parents. And when I got into more serious businesses was when after I finished studying engineering and opened one of the first web hosting companies in Toronto, Juyo Networks. And from there, I just branched off into many different things, including social opportunities or social business such as the BHM Expo. And at present, it's the largest Black History Month event in Canada, which is recognized by, pretty much everyone. But I mean, I've sort of, like I said, I've been around the globe and I've been involved in different opportunities in the Caribbean, in Asia, in Africa, and also in Latin America. Um, I also have the advantage of having family members who were born and raised in Venezuela. So as a child, I learned to speak Spanish. Most of my cousins were born in Caracas. And so being able to speak three languages, French, Spanish, and English, gave you an additional advantage, right? And I spent enough time in Korea that I also started picking up Korean. So yeah, so my business experience is varied. I tend to, be willing to follow growth opportunities and maximize the opportunity before getting out. There is no, great attachment to any particular field or any particular opportunity. The goal is to grow it to the greatest that it can be, and then to move on.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I always impressed with is, first of all, you're very steady and you're focused and you're low key and you have goals, but you're also immensely curious. We met through a mutual friend, Dave, and I love this story you tell about Dave because I just want to paint a picture for our mutual friend, Dave. To me, I'm a writer, and to me, I tell him all the time, I'm going to write a story about you, Dave, because you're the most interesting person because you are a bumblebee. In the morning, he could be with what you would consider the most questionable people in Canada. And in the afternoon, he could be sitting down with the most respected people in Canada. And he's got a heart of gold. And one of his charm is you would never know who he is and what he does by the way he just dresses as a regular guy. Well, actually more than just a regular guy because he's noticeable. And I just love the fact that you saw him at an event and no one was talking to him because they were looking at his presentation and they weren't curious about, well, how did this guy get there? And it ended up like, this is why we're talking right now because you took that effort. And I love this guy. He's got the biggest heart. And this is why everyone deals with them because they know one thing about him. And this is also about yourself. You don't get any satisfaction after screwing anybody. And you also know that you're looking at the 20th deal, not the first deal. So, Kingsley, your story about, and it's a testament to your curiosity, is how you met Dave. Share that story.
Yeah, so I was having a welcome to the Senate party for a senator friend of mine who was who was just appointed. And the party was being held at the Albany Club, which is a conservative club in Toronto, political club. And as I scanned the room, I saw this one fellow who had a ponytail. And the folks who were invited to the party were mostly Bay Street types, lawyers, other politicians, other senators, and business people.
And for our for our listeners, Bay Street is the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street.
Yeah, exactly. So Dave sort of stood out in the crowd, and so I went over to introduce myself and to find out who he was and to get to know a little bit about this you know peculiar fellow, I guess we can say.
With his
And that's
ponytail.
yeah, and that's how we became friends, right? And I mean that was, I don't know, probably back in '07, '08, somewhere around there.
Yes.
So it's yeah, it's been quite a while. And he's an interesting fellow. That's yeah, for sure.
Very interesting. And
Yeah.
we're going to be working with Dave on one of the projects that you're working on, and we'll talk about that because he is a very diverse individual in all the projects that he works on. You
Mhm.
and I met, I believe, with George, your good friend George.
Ramakan, the High
Yes.
Commissioner.
So if you can just share a little about George.
Yeah, so George is the Jamaican High Commissioner to London. At the time, he was the Consul General in Toronto, and I was advisor to the CARICOM um, Council Corps. I don't know if you're familiar with that body, but CARICOM is about 15 countries that work cooperatively in the Caribbean region. So I met George because he was the dean of CARICOM when I was appointed for a 3-year term, and we really hit it off and became very good friends. And I mean, I think I spoke to George just maybe 5 days ago. So, but he worked, for the country of Jamaica for a long period of time. He was a member of the Senate for almost 30 years. He's served in different roles. He's had different portfolios, serving the country of Jamaica. And we met while he was serving his first term as Consul General in Toronto. And he actually became the first person to serve multiple terms as a Consul General under two different governments, which is
Yeah.
unusual, right? So he's a very interesting man. He's also a very religious man, a man of faith, a very honest person, and an all-around good human being.
I think he's a gentleman.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I also remember he came to a school to talk to these young kids.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
he just had such a high, like, inspiring them. You could tell when someone, like, he literally enjoyed it. It was like almost like a great uncle or a grandfather. He got such joy from it, and a wonderful individual.
oh for
Now,
sure.
you through your ventures, you ended up in Korea. How did you end up working in Korea? Like, what type of business was that?
Uh, um, the business we're operating in Korea at the moment is an engineering business, right? Um, I mean, we did some other things there, but the primary business right now is the engineering company. And we actually, there are 3 patents we're working on at the moment. One we're looking to raise some capital for. We're very close to completing that particular project. And it has to do with high voltage, the high voltage electrical grid. Um, then we're working on, I don't want to give away too many secrets. We're working on an Industry 4.0 project. And for those out there who are familiar with that, that technology, they'd get a sense of what we're doing. But it's a very, very high tech company, which is my area of education and some expertise, right? So yeah, so that's what we're doing in South Korea. Um,
You know what I want you to branch off into,
yeah,
because you've also worked in a number of African countries. And regarding your African countries, during the lockdowns, you saw something that you were very interested in providing: education, internship, and also job opportunities. And if you could just tell the story, the origin story, because I love that story. I've heard it a ton of times, and I've made you tell it a zillion times when we talk to people who are actually interested in our projects together. But I just think
Yeah.
it's such a human story where opportunity came out of it. If you can share that story, and it was in Kenya, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So I was in Westland, which is probably the wealthiest area in Kenya. And I I decided to hire, I'd spent some time in the country and got to understand a number of opportunities that were there. Some we were taking advantage of. So I decided to hire 12 young people to do some social media work for us for a project we're doing in North America. And one of the guys showed up without any shoes while we were doing a job interview. Very smart kid. I have to say it was a kid. It was probably 19, 20 at the time. And he had no shoes, but very smart. And so I hired him along with a few other folks, and I asked him, like, why didn't you wear your shoes? Kind of being an ignorant Canadian, I hadn't seen anyone, without shoes before. So he couldn't afford to buy shoes, right? So I was wearing a brand new pair of Adidas, and I thought, well, I mean, I've got other shoes in my hotel. So why don't I, give him this pair? And I had an extra pair in my briefcase in the car. So I gave him my pair of Adidas, and I switched shoes, and that's how I, sort of developed a relationship with this kid, right? And
How
the
did
shoe
he
meant,
treat those shoes? How did
I
he
mean,
treat those shoes? Because
well,
I
this
love
was the
that
thing.
story.
The shoe meant everything to him. I've never seen a shoe kept more clean than the way he kept those shoes. Every time I saw him, he wouldn't even allow a scuff mark on those shoes. And it just goes to show you, I mean, some things we sort of take for granted, can make a huge impact on other people's lives, right? From that experience, I decided, a few years later to start developing an e-learning platform because I saw how, kids as smart as Samuel was his name, um, they go through the process, they get educated, and there were just no opportunities for them. So I decided to create an e-learning platform that not only offered skills training, but also found job opportunities, remote work opportunity for some of these very intelligent, very capable young people in African countries like Kenya.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that's launched, correct?
Yeah, so it is online. We're going through the process of bringing on more professors and more courses before we do a global launch.
During the beginning of the lockdowns, you had come back to Canada and
Mhm.
you started reevaluating a lot of things because for a number of years you were a world globetrotter working in various countries in various industries. And I just want to share this with everyone. Kingsley is probably one of the best networkers. That's why I shared with you the story about Dave and George, because Kingsley's curious and a great networker, someone who's generally interested, not looking for something, is curious. From the doorman to a young kid without shoes, because you never know. And Kingsley, you came back to Canada during the lockdowns, and I'm speaking for myself. Canada has changed drastically under the current regime under Justin Trudeau. Many of the rights and freedoms and the opportunities that were given to business owners have been taken away for some agendas that are not Canadian agendas. And there's a lot of Canadians right now, along with Americans, but you and I are Canadians, who love Canada, however, are starting to see that the opportunity is no longer there for them. Their businesses were shut down. They weren't allowed to see family or friends. The government has been very divisive with their rhetoric, splitting families and friends, colleagues, everything. And many people are looking to transition out, highly educated. They also have resources. Kingsley, I'm very interested about your transitioning out of Canada. Both you and I are proud Canadians, but there's been a change. There was a regime change from a democracy to what I'm looking at is a dictatorship under the Liberal government. It's been very divisive. The rhetoric coming from the top is hateful. A lot of Canadians who are kind, good people, hardworking business owners have felt that they've been attacked starting in 2017 when the Liberal government out of nowhere on July 18th completely came out and said we're rewriting the business part of the Income Tax Act, and when they were going to specifically target small businesses and basically state that these people were thieves and they were getting unfair advantage in Canada, and I can't emphasize that enough. This came from the Liberal government, and they completely rewrote the Income Tax Act and attacked family businesses where you couldn't hire your spouse to work for you. Think how ridiculous that is. They were just taking the benefit of why you would want to be self-employed. And then with the lockdowns, large super box stores were allowed to be kept open, while small businesses weren't allowed to be open. And then the rhetoric that if people did not follow Justin Castro, Trudeau, they were, they weren't Canadian, they were racist, they were misogynist. And it's pretty crazy when you saw the trucker protest. It was Canada. It's multicultural. You had Sikhs and you had Jamaicans and you had Eastern Europeans. You had people that actually seen what it was like to live in a corrupt country. They had lived in those countries and they were yelling at the top of their lungs that, hey, this isn't right. Now, Canada is a beautiful country, but I want to talk to you about opportunities outside of Canada, because this is something that people are looking for. It's harder to leave a country, but money has a simple law. It goes to where it makes more money and where there's opportunity, and there's less restrictions and regulations, and especially opportunity. And more importantly, I'm attracted to the businesses that you're involved in right now because they have to do with basic eating.
Yeah, I mean,
So if you could just share with me, what was your thinking during the lockdown? Because you and I started talking at the beginning of the lockdown, and then one day you called me and you said, for my kids and their sanity and their youth and their childhood and my wife, we've decided to go to Panama. And you and I were speaking at that moment while you were in Panama. And the last time I spoke to you, but 5 days before, you were in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. So share with me why you chose Panama, and what was your thinking of why you left?
well, leaving for me was not a difficult decision. I mean, I love Canada, but I've always known because of my parents' history. If you're familiar with Grenada,
Yes.
in the 1960s, long before I was born, my mother as a young person, as well as my father, they were involved politically with the local party. And then in 69, they started having issues. And then out of nowhere came, a socialist party, and the country just changed. And my parents had to leave. And Canada is a place where we've always had family. We've had family members who fought in the Canadian military in World War II, for example. Milton Cato, for example, who became the first Prime Minister of St. Vincent. So we've always been taught by our parents, you should go wherever you feel you're treated best, right? And it got to a point in Canada where I felt, I am no longer feeling as an entrepreneur wanted in this environment, right? So then the next question is, well, where do you go? So you start doing your research, looking around, what are the most important things, for your family and for yourself. Obviously, opportunity to do business is one. Healthcare, taxation as an entrepreneur is something you always wanna look at. And so you go down the list and looked at many countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. And in Latin America in particular, the four countries we looked at were Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama. Panama, we chose Panama because of many reasons. Obviously, crime is also an important thing, safety. But when you take a closer look at Panama, you quickly realize not only that it's one of the few growing economies in all of Latin America, but it has the second largest free zone in the world, right? Only after Hong Kong. We all know about the Panama Canal. There are advantages when it comes to taxation. Panama has a territorial tax system, which means if you are residing in Panama but have income coming from external of the country, you're not required to pay income tax, generally speaking. And I'm not giving tax advice here, but this is generally how things work. If you were to purchase a house in Panama, you're exempt from property tax on the first $120,000. And to put that into perspective, you can get a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Panama City, right in the heart of the city. So if you can envisage this on a $200,000 condo, first 20,000 is exempt from tax.
So the first 120,000 is
exempt from property tax for 10 years, right? So that means you're paying property tax on 80,000 at 0.5%, right? So if you do the math, it's not a lot. You're paying about maybe $400 a year on property tax, right?
If it's a new build?
Yeah, a new build, right? So I mean, there's a number of advantages. You have direct flights to 81 countries. It's a 5.5-hour flight for us from Toronto. So whenever we want to visit family, it's just choose your airline, American Airlines, Copa, whichever you wish. And you're in Toronto in 5.5 hours. It's like driving to Montreal from Toronto. Then, you put money in the bank here, you're getting 3% interest. That's not something that's happening in Canada. And if you want to invest with companies such as ours, you can earn up to 10%, issuing like in the microloan business, for example, or factoring, second mortgages, first mortgages, and more. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity in Panama. The areas we're focusing outside of financial services is food processing, real estate. For example, one business we're raising capital for right now is a chicken processing facility. And once that comes online, it'll be able to process 6,000 chickens per hour. And there's a shortage of chickens since the pandemic in Panama and other parts of Latin America. These are opportunities that exist here in an economy that is growing. Panama is the gateway to all of Central America and a good chunk of South America. Because as we know, most goods come through the canal. In the canal zone, it has to be reshipped or put on trucks to go to some of the other surrounding countries. To put into perspective, every roll of toilet paper that's sold in in Latin America pretty much comes to the Panama Canal. These are just a few of the opportunity of the benefits, I should say, of living in Panama. When it comes to healthcare, there's quality healthcare from private hospitals, private clinics. Health insurance in Panama is very cheap. For a family of four, the very, very high-end service would cost you about $4,000 a year, but you can pay as little as $2,000 a year with, world-renowned insurance companies. Allianz, for example, the French insurance company, which is who we're dealing with. And getting residency here is as a member of a country that's considered a friendly nation to Panama, is pretty easy. It can be as simple as buying $200,000 worth of real estate or investing as little as $160,000 in a company that you might want to open here. A strong legal system, number of opportunities here in a growing economy. These are some of the reasons why we chose Panama. Banking system like I said, in Panama, I don't want to upset anyone, but there are more banks closing down in the United States than there are. I mean, in Panama, it's unheard of, right? So when we're talking about security, what are we really talking about? All the security you need is here. But I understand sometimes, when we're not familiar with a place, we tend to, some fear, I guess, sets in. But I would urge anyone who is looking to invest, in a great country that's up and coming, that's developing and growing at a pretty rapid rate. Panama is a place definitely to look at.
Well, I want to thank you, Kingsley, for spending this time with me. And the name of your company is Purple Trinity Group. So Kingsley, if someone wants to follow what you're doing, where can they go?
You can find us on our new Instagram page, Purple Trinity Group, our website, purpletrinitygroup.com, or you can email us as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. This has been very informative. And as one Canadian to another living abroad, have an awesome weekend. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Kingsley.
Thanks, Peter.
And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And I find this all the time. I sit down with business owners all the time, and they always give me unsolicited advice because they want to share their knowledge, and it's really important.
Here with me is Peter Merrick,
president of merrickwealth.com.
Peter is an income and capital enhancement consultant,
speaker and author.
He is also a
recognized expert in the world of succession planning.
Over 800 published articles and 3 industry textbooks.
He's a Canadian who joins us today from San Diego, California. Thanks for joining us.
So, Peter Merrick, tell us about you.
Well, I've been in the financial service industry since the end of 1991.
I graduated during the recession. The baby boomers were in their positions, so there was no jobs. So the 2 businesses that opened up were the technology field and the financial field. It was the Wild West in both of them. So I had this brilliant idea, and I had a friend of mine, and we started talking, and I said, hey, how difficult would it be for us to get a mutual fund dealer license? Not difficult enough. Thank God for those 10 years, the market just went up. I would sit down and I would take somebody's entire life savings that they spent 15, 20 years accumulating it. This young kid who knew nothing about nothing, and I would go and just invest it, and luckily it went up because the markets were crazy in the 90s. It was a boom time.
But in 2004, my life blew up.
I almost went bankrupt, but I was very fortunate because there were very few CFPs at the time, but every university in Canada wanted to offer the CFP program. So I got recruited as a prof. And it was great. I was reading all the textbooks. I would call all the big publishers. And what I came to the conclusion was the succession planning was missing.
One of the issues is there was very little talking beyond the accumulation stage. Like, how do you have a healthy life after you've done that?
I also looked at demographics. At the turn of the 20th century, the average life expectancy in the West and North America was 43 years old. And people are dying at 83. No one ever lived to 83.
Well, so I always say that there's two financial plans. There's the financial one that we work on, and there's what you get to do with all your time and that energy once you're done. And with this thing that they've been racing towards, they've hit it. But if they haven't thought about what they're going to do after or how they're going to feel validation for their existence, they just never stop. They just keep going.
Well, it's not anybody's fault because when people are young, they focus too much on doing. And later on in life, they have to focus on being.
So I wrote my own textbooks because
I thought it was very important to talk about how do you transition from the first half of life, which Carl Jung called it the mourning, where you're accumulating, whether it's your ego, designations, education, houses.
The second half is deconstruction, giving wisdom away, giving away my money, giving away my time, leaving a legacy.
So talk to me about that stage. What's the purposeful way or kind of the best practices, ways, or considerations for people to take when transitioning into that stage of life?
Well, one, decide whether or not you want an exit. I find between the ages of 55 and 70, a lot of people feel that I'm just tired doing the same thing that I've always done, and I have the money now. So maybe I should get out when the going is good and pass on my business to someone who's got the energy to navigate it. Number two, who are you going to sell your business to? There's one issue about selling it to a family member or an employee. What happens after you sell it? Things don't go right. A lot of business owners want to sell their business because they just want to wash their hands. But by selling it to someone you know, you're not getting out of your business. The best is to sell to a third-party purchaser. The last one is after they make that transition from being a business owner, building a nest egg for themselves to have choice, they don't know what they're going to do. I've spoken to people who say, I'm going to take up golf. So my question is, do you golf now? I don't golf now. So what makes you think you're going to golf later? I just want to share with you guys a story.
There was a gentleman, his name was Bob Hunter. He was quite a celebrity. He started Greenpeace during the height of my blow up. When I was going through business loss, he was bringing me on national television. And you know what he was doing? He was saying, so Peter, don't you do that? And then he would give my phone number and he would give my web address. The reason why it went by merrickwealth.com, because it was almost like a phone number that would run across the television and I could actually see myself making money off of it. And he was dying. He had prostate cancer. And he turned to me and said, Peter, one day you will be in a position that you'll help someone else. And let me share with you about the legacy. Bob's been dead for 16 years. And I'm sharing you the legacy of Bob Hunter because he made a difference for me. And if I make a difference in anyone else's life, I'm a product of those people who are willing to do things and they had no expectations. And a true mentor is someone who has no expectations that they're going to see the tree blossom.
The reason I wrote The King of Main Street is younger people don't know how to find the right mentors, and older people have this need to mentor. It's almost like a biological need because they can see beyond their physical existence. They know that the sun was here before them and it will be after them, and what's going to be left behind that they leave.
I would joke, I can't make you money, but I can definitely save you money. What I mean by that is I am a Sherpa. That's someone who would guide someone to help them come down. But I realize the most precious asset they have is not their money. It's their time.
What last piece of advice would you like to give our listeners?
If you have a business, the most important thing to ask yourself is, why did you get into the business? And it's usually not to create a legacy, it's to create the lifestyle that you want. And at that point, ask yourself, what do you want to do during your last days?
The last human freedom is to choose one's own beliefs, one's own way. Everything else you can have taken away from you. But what you believe and how you choose to act in the world, that is yours.
And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And that is going to give you fulfillment emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.